Hello everyone, this is Stepan. Shakhriyar, Mamedyarov and Vladimir Kramnik played a very instructional exchange variation of Queen's Gambit declined in round 6 of the candidates tournament. Before this game, Mamedyarov was sharing first place with Caruana with an excellent score of 3.5 out of 5, while Kramnik started the tournament off great and then had a bit of a stumble, and he was at 50% before round 6. In this game, Mamedyarov was white and he started with pawn to d4. We have d5 by Vladimir Kramnik, classical, c4, e6, Queen's Gambit declined, knight to c3, knight to f6, and c takes d5. Mamedyarov goes for the exchange variation of Queen's Gambit declined. Knight takes d5, e4, forcing the knight to take on c3, that's the only move. Knight takes, b takes, and Kramnik immediately strikes at white's formidable central structure with c5. And in this position, white has an edge if you ask the edges, but it's still very common theory and both sides have something to play for. And before the hyper-modern era of chess at the start of the 20th century, these types of positions were already considered winning for white, but then defenses such as the Grunfeld or the King's Indian started being played, and the hyper-modernists proved that black can give up the center to white at the start of the game and then strike and destroy it later on with compensation and even with an advantage. In this position, Mamedyarov plays rook to b1, developing the rook on the open file, bishop to e7, and bishop to b5 check by Mamedyarov, developing the bishop with tempo, and this enables him to castle and get his pieces out faster, as Kramnik is now forced to react with bishop to d7, covering the check. But Mamedyarov now retreats with bishop to d3, and the point of the check and then retreating was to disrupt black's development and to stop the queen from looking at d4. Mamedyarov now has an easier time maintaining his central domination, and Kramnik can't be so fast to destroy the center. He continues with c takes d, we have c takes d, and knight to c6, attacking d4, and Mamedyarov should have defended and developed at the same time with knight to f3, but instead he decided to move the bishop for the third time with bishop to e2, just uncovering the queen to the defense of the d4 pawn. And it's not a bad move, but developing another piece would have been definitely more useful. Rook to c8 by Kramnik, knight to f3 now, and queen to a5 check. An aggressive move, but not a good move, as bishop to d2 covering the check gives white a clear edge. And Mamedyarov can't, of course, cover the check with the queen to defend his a-pawn at the same time, because if he plays queen to... if he plays queen to d2 covering the check, then bishop to b4 would just be winning for black, as it would either win the queen or force him to give up an exchange, and he would be forced to give up the exchange or lose the queen, which was pinned to the king. So he played bishop to d2, covering the check instead, and it would be unwise for Kramnik to capture on a2 the pawn which is now undefended, because if he takes on a2, he could play rook takes b7, and white would have a superior position with the active rook on the 7th rank. So after bishop to d2, Kramnik plays bishop to b4, increasing the pressure on d2, on the bishop, and on the king indirectly. And Mamedyarov reacts with rook to b2, defending the bishop once more so that he doesn't have to recapture with the king if he wants to, and so that he doesn't have to give up his castling rights if unnecessary. So we have bishop takes d2, queen takes d2, queen takes, and now he does indeed capture with the king, realizing that once the queens are off, the king is perfectly safe in the center, and it could even prove itself useful as an extra piece in the upcoming middle game and soon an end game. We have knight to a5, threatening to enter c4, and rook b to b1, just getting away from any possible forks with knight to c4, so that he doesn't have to mind the tactical possibilities. King to e7 by Kramnik. He also reasoned that the king is more useful in the center than castled. Rook h to c8, getting the other rook to the most active square. f6, solidifying his position by Kramnik, and preventing the f3 knight from jumping to e5 or g5, which is a very important thing. And you should always mind which squares your opponent's knight can go to, and stop it if possible. h4, Mamedyarov pushes his kingside pawns, trying to create a majority. Rook h to d8, bishop to d3, a6, and Kramnik has a plan to create a passed pawn of his own on the queen side. king to e3, getting the king closer to the center and defending the important d4 pawn, b5, g4, and Mamedyarov is expanding on the king side, and Kramnik is doing the same thing on the queen side. Now we have bishop to e8, uncovering the rook to the attack of d4, knight to g1. Now that the knight can't go to the 5th rank, he is transferring it to e2 and then to more useful squares in the center. It's a high-class maneuver by Mamedyarov, especially because after knight to c6, the d4 pawn is attacked, and Mamedyarov is now in time to defend with knight to e2, which if he hadn't played knight to g1, he wouldn't be able to. Rook to d6, preparing to double rooks and to put even more pressure at the weak d pawn. Rook to d1, preparing to defend. Rook c to d8, doubling, and bishop to c2, defending d4 once more by clearing the path for the rook on d1. Knight to a5, and bishop to d3, now preventing the knight from entering c4, and the knight goes back to c6, and the position is almost all zeros, completely equal, and both sides really have no attacking chances here or any clear plans on how to improve or gain any initiative at all. Bishop to c2, and Kramnik doesn't repeat his strikes on the king side with h5. I think Mamedyarov wanted to go for a draw because he played bishop to c2, and if Kramnik had played knight to b4, then that would have been a second time repeating, and perhaps a threefold repetition would have occurred and the draw would have been agreed. But Kramnik deviates, he plays h5, striking at white's expanded king side. We have g5, advancing the pawn, f takes g, and e5, an aggressive zwischenzug by Mamedyarov, as he is now forcing the rook back before recapturing on g5. Rook goes to d7, and now h takes g. And now Kramnik makes a mistake, a weird move. He plays h4. Much better was to defend the pawn and keep it on h5 and to just play g6, solidifying the structure, because the h4 pawn is now weak and it can't be defended by a pawn, so it will need attention from black's pieces, which are much needed in the center as well. And Mamedyarov is now clearly better because of h4. This pawn push worsened Kramnik's position significantly, and he now has something to take care of for the rest of the game. And a very aggressive move by Mamedyarov, now g6. It wasn't the best move, but it's locking down black's g-pawn, a move which is good and bad at the same time, because the g6 pawn will now need to be constantly defended, as it's attacked by Kramnik's bishop, but it's also slowing down black's progress on the king side and creating a useful attacking piece around Kramnik's king, as pawns close to the king can sometimes or often help create mating attacks. The game continues with knight to a5, rook b to c1, rook c7, bishop to d3, initiating an exchange, rook d to c8, and now a pair of rooks gets traded off, rook takes, and rook h1. Mamedyarov is now almost completely winning, as a matter of fact. He's able to target the weak h-pawn, which is now indefensible, and he also has much more active pieces than the king. A bad idea by Kramnik to initiate a trade of rooks, as it's now much harder to control white's progress. I mean, Mamedyarov has a simple plan: take the h-pawn, attack the g7 weak pawn, and just win the game. Knight to c4 check by Kramnik. The king goes to f4. Of course, Mamedyarov doesn't give up his bishop. Knight to b2, attacking the bishop. It retreats to e4, b4, trying to pretend that he has a strong pawn majority on the queen side, but it's much too slow for him. And now the rook captures on h4. Mamedyarov is now a pawn up and clearly winning. Kramnik is trying to prove compensation for the loss of the pawn, but it's not that he doesn't have any. He's in fact so much worse that it's as if he were 4 pawns down materially. His bishop is bad, his knight is ridiculous on b2, and his king and rook are much inferior to Mamedyarov's. The game continues for a while. We have knight to d1, f3, defending the pawn and defending his bishop on e4 at the same time. Knight to c3, and now knight takes, b takes, and rook h2, an important move stopping the c pawn from advancing. Rook to c8, king to e3, bishop to b5, stopping the king from going to attack the c pawn because it now can't go to d2 or to d3. f4, starting to push his queenside pawns. Bishop to c4, attacking a2, and now rook h7, attacking g7. And after this, Kramnik is just forced to defend passively with rook to g8, as if he should play king to f7 defending the pawn. In this position, if he plays king to f7, Mamedyarov could just win on the spot with rook h8, checking the king and winning the undefended c8 rook. So he has to play rook to g8. And now a3, he has time to save the a pawn. a5, bishop to c2, preventing Kramnik from playing a4, king to d7, and d5 now. This is the best move of the game by Mamedyarov, even though it's not engine approved. It's a pawn sacrifice which has a clear purpose. If Kramnik captures with the e-pawn, Mamedyarov will have 3 strong connected pawns, and if he captures with the bishop, as he did in the game, it clears the essential square for the king to enter the position. So after bishop takes d5, Kramnik of course accepts the sacrifice, he can't let Mamedyarov play d6. Mamedyarov is now able to play king to d4. A great conception and a high-class sacrifice which isn't engine approved, but it serves a purpose and improves white's position, practically speaking. And now after bishop to a2, he's even able to play king takes c3, just recapturing his pawn, and which Kramnik couldn't defend. And it was Kramnik's greatest hope in this position, the advanced c-pawn, but he had to let it go because the rook is defending g7. And the position is now completely winning for Mamedyarov. He really played a remarkable attacking game and managed to exploit every single one of Kramnik's mistakes. The game continues for a bit with king to c6, rook to h2, king to c5, trying to get the king closer to play, rook to d2, preventing the king from entering the position with king to d5, rook h8, rook to d7, striking at g7 again, and here Kramnik makes the last terrible losing move, letting Mamedyarov win a bit faster. In fact, he checks the king with rook to h3, but this now enables Mamedyarov to gain a tempo at the loose bishop on a2 and still to be able to win the g7 pawn with the rook, and it's completely over. So after king to b2, attacking the bishop, bishop d5, he just takes with rook takes g7, and now it's 2 pawns up, and the g6 pawn is looking unstoppable in fact. King to d4, rook h7, rook to g3, attacking g6, rook h5, rook to g2, rook to g5, and now of course he can't take because the g pawn would be unstoppable, so rook f2, attacking f4, g7, bishop to e4, and g8, queening the pawn. I'm not caring of course that Kramnik is able to capture on c2, is able to capture the bishop on c2, as the material advantage is too superior. So Kramnik takes with rook takes c2 check, king b3, rook c3, king to a4, rook c5, and now he has to be a bit careful. He plays rook to g2, an important move which had to be played, as Kramnik was threatening mate on the spot with bishop to c2 check, because the king had nowhere to go. The pawn is covering b4, the rook is covering b5, and the bishop would check the king. And he can, of course, Kramnik can, of course, grab the rook on g2 in this position, but Mamedyarov would just recapture with the queen and enter a queen versus rook, ending a pawn up, which is completely winning. And after bishop to f3 in this position, Mamedyarov plays queen to d8 check, and Kramnik gave up and resigned. The position is so losing that black couldn't survive if he was given an extra knight or an extra bishop on the board. It's just so losing. The queen and rook are just too strong. It was a brilliant attacking game and a brilliant Queen's Gambit declined by Mamedyarov, and he definitely showed that he is worthy of being world's number 2 at the moment, and perhaps that he is even worthy of a worthy challenger to Magnus Carlsen for the world title, and I think he stands a great chance to win the candidates tournament. He played the game with no mistakes at almost engine level of play, which is amazing. And Kramnik went badly wrong in this one. He let Mamedyarov run him over without even creating any attacking chances of his own, and he will need to pick himself up and start playing as he did at the start of the tournament. Okay everyone, thanks very much for watching. I hope you got something from this very instructional Queen's Gambit declined. If you liked the video, please consider subscribing, and see you soon with more games from the tournament. Cheers, bye, have a nice evening.